would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land, and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to Beyond the Surface. This is a space for conversations that sit at the edges of faith, identity, power, and recovery, especially for those of us who have been shaped, stretched, or harmed by fundamental religion or high control systems. Some episodes are personal, some are reflective, some are educational or curious or quietly disruptive. All of them are grounded in lived experience and a deep respect for the complexity of leaving, questioning, and rebuilding meaning. We will be talking about religious trauma, various forms of abuse, cult dynamics, queerness, and recovery, not in neat answers, but in honest conversations. In listening to these conversations, some parts might be heavy or activating for you. Please take care of yourself while listening and feel free to pause or step away if you need to. I'm Sam, and I'm really glad that you're here with us. Welcome, Jay. Thanks for joining me.
Lovely to be here.
I am excited about this episode because people will know your mum because she has been on this podcast before. And I didn't actually mention this to you beforehand. Your mum's episode just so happens to be my highest ranking and most popular episode of the last 2 years.
Good. Okay. So, just a small bar to, keep in the back of my mind.
Yeah, so she's set the bar high. So if people don't recognize, your mum is the beautiful Linda Pesavento, and it was just everybody loved that episode, and so I'm so grateful that you are joining me for this episode. And you mentioned it's your first podcast, so that's fun too.
Yeah, no, definitely, and hopefully,
Amazing.
if my first podcast episode can also be a highest rated one, I'll certainly have that to win over during family dinners.
Yes, can we kick mum off the pedestal?
Maybe.
Oh, goodness. Okay, now I know that, I'm going to start with like this big, broad, vague question that I start with everybody. So, Jay, where does your story start?
Yeah, so this has definitely got, so many different answers, but I think that the cleanest one is definitely going pretty far back. Is when I was little, I forget the specific age, it was around 5, I was diagnosed with leukemia, which not the best thing to have to go through as a little kid.
Yeah.
And that was definitely quite a tumultuous experience, for the whole family. I talked to my mum before, who's obviously shared her experience with a lot of that side of her story before, of just how much that racked with her faith. And for me, that wasn't even a question. I mean, I barely knew what was going on, like I knew I was sick, but it was just like, this is just a really bad stomach bug, I had no sense of mortality or, what a life-threatening chronic illness was, or, the fact that there was anything going on. I did experience, some spiritual experiences that I'd say that have still stuck with me. But even at that age, like those sort of things are things that I didn't really comprehend until much, much later. And then I think it was when I was 8 that, and I still don't fully know what was going on in my head, but I know that, just mostly from being told that that was the first time that I had really been confronted with the fact. I think some family friends of ours, one of their young children passed away from leukemia, and that was the first time that I think I was as a young kid confronted with. At this stage, I was already in remission. We'd moved from Hong Kong, where I had the majority of my treatment. We were now living back in Australia, and that was the first point where I yeah, was really confronted with the fact that like this could have killed me. And
Yeah.
that actually ended in me on a couple of occasions trying to end my own life,
Yeah.
which is not common for an 8-year-old, suffice to say.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that those sort of 2 points, that really was the start of me, I think, challenging my expectations of faith, mortality, fate, destiny, and all these different things. And I think for a long time, I've been, and it's only up until in the last, I think, year that I've actually come through this sort of internal sense that for a while I genuinely felt like I was meant, like cancer was meant to take me away, you know?
Yeah.
Cancer was meant to get me, and that the sort of rest of my life and every sort of bad thing that ever happened, whether it was bad luck or bad decisions I'd made or just circumstances not going ideally, was all just, oh, this is just fate trying to course correct,
Yeah.
And yeah, that's been something that I've struggled with for quite some time and has really fucked with so many different, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into the many
Mm.
facets of my experience of just of identity, queerness, neurospiciness, faith, spirituality, community, and just
They're all my
all of these
favorite
things.
words, Jay.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'm trying to hit the buzzword so we can get the view count up.
SEO is
Yeah,
pumping.
exactly.
I don't want to assume that people have listened to your mum's episode. So, like, and for you as a child, it is very much a different experience than what it is for your mum as the parent in this scenario anyway. But, like, as an 8-year-old grappling with things that no 8-year-old should be grappling with, like, let's just, like, be clear on that. Like, what was your understanding of the religious space that was being baked in around you that you were a part of within your family?
I mean, it's so hard to sort of reflect on those things because, like, we always, you always look back on the past through the lens of today, right?
Yeah.
And so I still kind of look back at, sort of the perspectives that I had and, with honestly, like, even though it's like, I'm 8 years old, I've got to give myself a little bit of, cut me a bit of slack, but I'm like, damn, I was so, willfully ignorant back then, or I was so naive. And it's like, yeah, I was a kid, like, come
You're
on.
an 8-year-old kid. I would expect that.
Yeah, but, I still, and like, I think, like, consciously, I do appreciate, I'm like, okay, I don't genuinely hold that sort of disdain towards my younger self. Definitely have in the past, but certainly not
Yeah.
today. But even subconsciously, there is still that little bit of like come on, things would have been so much better if I, as an 8-year-old had the knowledge that I currently do, nearly 20 years later.
Yeah.
And, but we all wish that. But I think that I've totally lost the specific wording of your original question.
Oh, it's fine. Most of the time I lose the wording of the question as soon as it's out of my mouth. So I basically was just going what do you remember about the religious space that you were being sort of like
Right.
baked into at that time?
Yeah, like I definitely recall, like Jesus and God and church was a huge part of just our life. My mum at the time was, I mean, here's where the fact that, I was 8 years old makes things a little fuzzy, but,
Yeah.
we were heavily involved in church, and then certainly, during various points, my mum was a very key part of our local church. She was one of the senior pastors, and not only a senior pastor, but just someone incredibly respected and revered within the community of the church. And so by extension, there was an expectation of placed on, I think particularly my sister and I, of just sort of like, oh, like you are the children of Linda Pesavento, and certainly from mum herself, this expectation to sort of participate. And some of that I admit, like in retrospect, I'm like, okay, this was just a case of dad's at work and you're responsible for us. Of course, we've got to, and it's your job to be working at church. So of course we've got to go to, morning church, afternoon church. and then also evening church. And that's not a case of like how devoutly Christian we are. It's because mum has to go to work and
you're a pastor's kid.
Yeah, so we just got to tag along. But certainly at the time, I wasn't thinking about that. It was just like, ugh, why do we have to be so, committed to this? And one of the biggest things that I can recall was just this expectation of like giving to the church. And I remember quite early on, because I've always been quite a techie kid and, good with a camera. And, we had a little camera. Well, it was a big camera set up, with the projectors. And so you could have the lyrics of the praise and worship going. And we actually had a couple cameras. And so we had, a switchboard so that one camera that was, on the floor of the, to get close-ups and everything like that, and then one that was at the back to get more static shots, and you could switch between, so it was all glamorous and cool, all in service of God.
Yes, all the aesthetics have got to be good.
God loves those wipe transitions, he's really important to him. But I was quite good at that stuff, and so I, naturally fell into a role there, and that. But like, part of it was like, oh, look, I enjoyed doing it and I was good at it. But there was definitely an expectation of like, okay, but like, you are good at this. And so you ought to provide your God-given gifts back to God, right? And that was definitely something that was drilled in. Like, I won't say that it was all like, oh, and this, these strict expectations that, plagued me. I mean, hell, I was a young kid to, young teenager towards the end of getting to tell a bunch of people up to twice my age what to do because you just got on the camera team volunteering today. Well, I've been doing it for 4 years, and so I'm now technically your superior, which, definitely gave me a bit of a power trip, which, hey, look.
I mean, any good teenager is going to take that power trip and run with it. Let's be fair.
100%. Especially if it's in service for the Lord. Like,
yes.
I mean, what is religion if not, power trips in service for the Lord?
Oh, goodness. I mean, like, as a teenager, I imagine you had far more awareness of, like, the type of religious space that you were in. Did you see it as, like, quite a fundamental space? Like, and what was your personal connection with the space that you're in? Like, did you feel like, I mean, I'm going to use like really like overtly churchy language for a moment. Did you feel like you had a relationship with God?
That is a difficult question because I always felt as a kid like I had a relationship with God because I was told I had a relationship with God.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I just I was definitely, when I was younger in the sort of thick of, well, this is true because it's true,
Yeah.
and I've been told that this is the way that things are. And so that just must be the way things are, even though the way that you describe it is not how I'm experiencing it. But ultimately, it is true, and so like it doesn't matter that we're experiencing two fundamentally different things. I guess something's up with me. Obviously, I'm the broken one. I'm the wrong one. Because it's like, oh, did I have a relationship with God? It's like, well, yeah, of course I did. Did ever talk to me? Well, no. Does God ever answer my prayers? No. Have I experienced God moving through my life and things that I'm like, oh, this is a clear sign of God, doing his thing? Well, again, no, but he's God. So, it's just.
It just is, right?
Yeah. And I think the other problem is because I'd had the experience of, and I don't know if even consciously I was thinking about it like this at the time, but I can certainly rationalize it of just, I survived cancer, not a lot of people do that. And it's like, well, what further proof do I need of God's will and power than the fact that he saved me? I got to experience this miracle. And like, hey, let's be clear, it was a big miracle. So, maybe my lifetime of miracles have been spent on this one big thing,
Yeah. I mean, my instinct is to sort of go like, did that almost get used to like gaslight yourself? Like, I can't feel like this is not real because like, how do I then rationalize? And this might have been like later teens, early sort of is, I guess, ones who sort of like thinking about it more. But was it like, I can't not be grateful for God in my life because, like, I survived cancer. How
Oh,
do
for
I make
sure.
that make sense? Yeah.
And furthermore, because, my mum ended up writing a whole book about, her experience of my experience of cancer.
Yeah.
And, you know, so much of that is about, like it's called Keep Walking, it's persistence
Mhm.
and dealing with the faith crisis and all those things. But she also preached about it, and she, referenced her book when she preached, and, people read the book in church, and it was, it was a known quantity within church. And so to a degree, I wasn't just Linda Pesavento's kid. I was
Mm.
also the Keep Walking kid.
Yeah, right.
I was the kid that God saved from cancer. And, being in church where, stories are shared through sermons that are so personal. I, as, a young kid to, like early teen, would have people who I've got no clue who they are approaching me as if they know my entire story, because it's like, well, like a big part of my story has been shared, but then that's also the only thing that they know about me. And
Yeah.
so there was a big period of time where I like really resented that part of me, that part of my story. Like I remember like feeling as particularly in my teens, like disdain towards people who like shared their, story of like recovering through or living through, some other terminal disease or, chronic disease and stuff like that, because I'm like, how dare you make this your identity? Because, and, I'd never sort of at the time, thought about it any deeper than that. Since then I have, but it was basically just like, how dare you, how dare you do this thing that like I feel like has been so, like has minimized my own experience, because it's like, I feel like I'm so much more than this. And, but like the reality is because in those instances, those people are claiming their story, they're the ones that are like being like, hey, like this is a part of me and I am owning this. Whereas I'm not like, I mean, hell, I told you, this is the first time I've done a podcast, I am not the first one that got to tell my story.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the really tricky thing about telling kids stories, right? Because you're not actually consenting to that. And then in the space that you're in, you then get just reduced to being like the cancer kid, like, or this, like the survivor, and you lose the rest of your identity and you just get reduced to that. And then, like you said, everybody knows. I call that like either like survivor or like testimony porn almost. Like
Yeah.
everybody just wants the story. Like they just, or like churches love a good testimony, love a good redemption arc. And it
Inspiration porn.
feels, yeah, absolutely. So like to be essentially like a child, like a teenager, and to just be reduced to this one facet of your story, like how do you then get to find all of the other parts of who you are when everybody else just keeps reducing you to being the cancer kid?
Yeah, exactly. And, which it's like on one level, as I said, like it's a story that is mine that I didn't get to tell, but
Yeah.
then at the same time, and, I still feel like that is, obviously, I have some ownership over like, yeah, like I was strong enough to beat it, but, the doctors did a pretty good job. The chemo, all
Yeah.
the radiotherapy and all those things, I reckon helped a pretty substantive amount. Yeah, just a little bit. But the point is like, I certainly didn't even have that sort of like back then. I didn't take any ownership over that recovery at all. I was like, what did I do? It's like, the doctors did a good chunk of it and the medication. And then at that point, like, well, I guess I got to make God kind of responsible for that as well. And it's like, well, why am I like, this doesn't feel like my achievement,
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like almost like you just got lost in that. Like it almost just like swallowed around you and you just got lost in the sea of all of that. And so then, like, what was it like for you just even as a teenager to just start like that's the most beautiful part of being a teenager, is to find different parts of who you are and like, what do I like? Like even just like basic parts of our identity. And so you're reduced to this. What was it like for you to just explore other parts of your identity while everybody is still talking about your story?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where things get a bit of a roller coaster, honestly,
Yeah.
because so when I was growing up, when we first moved from Hong Kong, we moved to like literally less than, maybe like a minute walk away from the school that we were going to. And it was a tiny school, K to year 6, and maybe a total of 60 people at its peak when I was
Oh,
there.
yeah, that
Um,
is tiny.
yeah, and so suffice to say, you couldn't, like, especially when you're much younger, you couldn't, help being friends with people. You
Yes.
couldn't trip over without being like, oh, I guess we're besties today. It's
Yeah.
though I say that, like, I remember, and again, I've got no idea what was going on in my head, but I remember early days of school, literally just trying to walk back home on several occasions, which, to be fair, was a very easy thing to do. It wasn't like I was gonna have to walk for an hour, but, there were
Yeah.
several occasions where I was like hiding during, class time, and then, gonna try sneaking out and stuff like that. They caught me every single time. I was not the stealthy, they were certainly not looking for an MI6 candidate in 8-year-old me.
Yeah.
But eventually, I did like make friends there. But again, like sort of couldn't help it. But by the time that I moved schools and I moved to a Christian school that was actually attached to our church, so it was sort of partnered up with the church that we were going to at the time, and so very, very close knit.
Yeah.
And I went there at the start of middle school. And so yeah, well, I think at year 5? And then because I was going from such a tiny school to a, certainly proportionally bigger school, I really struggled to like have friends, and evidently what would later become a very clear, like, oh, it's because I was autistic as fuck,
Yep.
but, hindsight's 2020. It wasn't until year 7 where I really substantively had friends. And for the majority of, like I had one friend from the previous school the previous smaller school, who had also gone to this school, and we were still friends, but he was, 2 years, my senior. And so, of course, in, big school, that is just decades of difference.
Yes.
And can't be hanging out with the senior college people as a middle schooler. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I still remember getting into a fight over being allowed to play on the handball court because they were discriminating against the middle schoolers and saying like, no, it's high school and seniors only. And I remember getting
Yeah.
into a bit of a tiff over that.
Yeah.
Suffice to say, like, up until year 7, and most of my days in the library, I became close with a couple of teachers who I'd just be like, okay, like, let's just talk history. Let's just divulge, let's discuss the Spartans over lunchtime, or the fall of the Roman Empire, because what else am I going to do as a little kid that's got no social things going on? But
Yeah.
I did eventually sort of figure out, like, I think it's like I overcame autism in the most autistic way possible, where I recognized, like, okay, none of this social stuff is making sense to me, but I'm going to make it make sense, and I'm going to learn the rules. I'm going to, methodically study the human condition, to the point that, like, by the time that I left school, I was, incredibly well liked amongst people. I was, a contender for student leader. I still say that the only reason that I didn't get in is because of my more secular views, which, is understandable for a Christian school, but
Mm-hmm.
well, I
Yep.
wouldn't even just say secular. I'd say particularly liberal, but not liberal. It's always confusing with Australian political
Yeah.
terminology when most of media is American.
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying. The viewers
I do,
understand what I'm
yes.
saying. We're all on the
Yeah.
same page. But I
Yeah.
digress. But it was also quite difficult, just the whole notion that so much of the community that was at school was also the same. So there was a Lighthouse, which is, can I use names? Can I name drop places?
Go for it.
Excellent. Okay. So, Lighthouse, which was, the church that was connected to the school directly. And so there's a lot of crossover with, people who go to the church sending their kids there. But then also another church, I think Gateway is what it was called. And so a lot of kids from Gateway also just happened to be at Cedars as well. And so they're amongst the two churches, basically, it was all church people. And so so any sort of extra activity, it's like, okay, like going to youth group was, the thing that you did on a Friday to hang out with all your buds from school. And that was, of course, organized through church. And so, it was very insular, the community. It was very just, well, insular was the perfect word, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it really created a bit of an echo chamber of just not a lot of social diversity, which of course, when I eventually found friends who were at school in my year who didn't go to church and, well, I mean, that was really the main thing, is the fact that they didn't go to church. They weren't part of church families. They didn't, like I immediately jumped to them, and they were certainly I'd say of the year, the misfit group, the majority of the people who would end up being queer in our year were in that group, whether they were queer out at the time or would post school come out. And so, but then also just, general nerds, and I'd say a concentration of neurospiciness in all likelihood.
The atypicals.
Exactly.
I mean, I am curious. Like you said, you were in an echo chamber. Like, you were getting it from school, you were getting it from church, you were getting it from home. Like, everywhere was very much that church, like, fundamental religious echo chamber. And so, like, even though you found this group of people, what was it in you that made it feel like it was okay to be friends with these kids and to believe things that were potentially more progressive than what the like the information that you were getting fed either at home or at church? Because I'm like, you're a teenager. What is making you think that you can think those things?
I think that it's so, like, the interesting thing is, like, my into sort of those friends, first and foremost, was just they were nerds. And, fortunately, the Bible doesn't have anything explicitly against, liking Star Wars.
I mean, give
As long
them
as
time, Jay. They'll find it.
Look,
If they don't find it, they'll make it up.
As long as you're not sort of quote unquote idolizing it too much, like, but so that was my sort of initial in. But the thing that I think became more apparent, like, when, we eventually would sort of talk about more, I guess, politicized conversations, is just realizing how much of the opinions I held were just not my own.
Yeah.
And, like, that became clear to me actually quite
That's huge, really. Like, I think, like, just understanding, like, cognitive development and indoctrination and all of those things, the fact that as a teenager you were like, these are not my own, is enormous.
Yeah, and, like, I don't, like, I've tried to reflect on sort of if there was, because I do remember being, I mean, I literally, because I talked to my mum just today, and I joked about the fact that, at one stage, when I was a little kid, I told some other kid that he was gonna burn in hell because he celebrated Halloween. And yeah, a normal child thing to say.
Yeah.
Which, of course, like, presently I find so ludicrous, because, I mean, it's we're barely at the middle of the year, and I've got maybe 25 different jack-o'-lantern decor things around my place. I adore Halloween. It's, it's my Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
which is, just a microcosm of, kind of the way that my opinions have shifted. But certainly, like, there was a stage where, as much as you can be as a child was in the Kool-Aid, and I guess it was sort of maybe know how much I really believed it, but like fake it till you make it sort of mentality of if I,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the whole thing with Christianity is like, you gotta evangelize, you gotta make sure that like, well, you don't think the way that I do, so I gotta make sure we're on the same page, Butto.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole purpose, right? Is like that you can't actually think differently, which I think is why it's so wild to me that you actually, like, there was just even a part of you that went, no, I don't actually think that that's what I think. I think that's like hella cool, to be fair, actually, like as a teenager to be able to notice those things. And so then what was it like for you to think those things and to be like, actually, no, I don't really agree with that. And then like, go back home into the family and into the church that you were in, thinking very differently about some of those things.
I think that like there were some things where I was like, okay, like we have different opinions. It's like, oh, you like this sports team and I like this sports team, but
Yeah.
oh well, whatever. But it very much became like, oh shit, this is going to impact some things when I,
Yeah.
like it was really, really hard when I, knew, like, as an example, someone who was gay in my year, and I was like, I should think about that. And then like the second that I did, I was like, oh yeah, there is like just no difference for me. Like it wasn't even like at the time it like there were certainly other things that were, I think, so I won't say crisis of faith, but like certainly a little bit more thinking about. But like I remember when
Mm.
I realized like I was pan was the fact that like I just thought about it. I was like, oh, I actually just don't care about this at all. Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't sort of like the only reason I have cared is because I got told to care. But now if I like really think about what is it that I think about this, I'm like, oh, it's interesting. One of the things that came up, like in just a conversation I had with my mum previously, because we were talking about the, my queer journey and stuff like that. And then I started sort of talking about neurodivergence, and she was like, oh, like don't get off into that. But I'm like, well, but for me personally, and I can't speak for, every queer or neuro, spicy person's experience, but for me, like they are just so intrinsically linked because like the whole sort of shtick, especially with like autism, is like, I don't get these social rules that are sort of all made up. What do you mean I can't wear a hat inside? Well, that doesn't make sense. And for me, that's just like, oh, you're a boy kisser or a girl kisser. Like, I don't know. Just, it's, why are we drawing lines? Like, I just genuinely,
Yeah.
it is so, for me, it's just genuinely like, is that person hot? Like, okay, well then, like, let's,
Good.
away we go. And so, but then obviously I recognize like, oh, I know that I don't care about this, but I'm
Yeah.
very, very aware of what the broader church opinion on this is.
Yeah.
And then also specifically what my parents' opinion on this is. And it certainly is not, yeah, we don't give a fuck either. Or at least at the time, certainly we've come through, a journey together. But the thing that did sort of, like I did wrestle with was about my gender. And I don't know specifically, I think it was just more the implications of what that meant to me were, severe, I guess, for lack of a better word, of, like what it would require for me personally and, how difficult that would be to, reconcile and work with and deal with and all these different things. But yeah, I remember that was one that, like, that was certainly not I feel this way. Okay. Because I guess, realizing I was pan, I could kind of just like stealth that and be like, I can enjoy people of all gender spectrums from afar. And, like I did date, but, like I dated within, like at the time being AMAB, just dating girls and sticking within the sort of heteronormative expectations, which,
Yep.
like, it's not like I was hiding, like, like I was gay and I was hiding that and, being like, okay, I'm like, I still liked girls. So it was not like I was having to pretend on that front.
Yeah.
But with, gender, it was this like, oh, if I like accept this is a bell I can't unring. and I got to do
Yeah.
something about it, because it's not like I can just, I can't just, you know, like if I accept that, if I sort of acknowledge it, because I remember even telling a therapist for the first time, which like this was when I was 18, on the eve of the HSC, I once again tried to take my own life, and mum and dad came home, and, we talked, and it was like, should probably talk to someone, a professional.
Yeah.
And, but then even talking to, I forget whether he was like a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but, you know, one of the,
One of them.
one of them. And even in, full kind of privacy, and, this is just here for my benefit, it took me so long to even like talk to him about what I was feeling, because I knew that, like, even if I knew, like, had sort of pretty much acknowledged it in my head, the second I say it out loud, it's out
It's
there.
real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
What
that,
was it in particular about your gender? Like, do you feel like it was something like in terms of like church gender binary language that was playing into that? Like, what was it in particular that felt like really like wrestly with it?
I mean, it was a lot of things. I mean, so I non-binary, presently, but at the time, because I didn't have that language, I guess to sort of, like, I will get to your actual question, but
Yeah, no, it's
will.
fine. Go for it.
So, like, the way I remember specifically the sort of first time that I was like, this is making me think about some things, is because, like, as a kid, I knew of, like, transness insofar as like jokes that had been made. Like, I think my first experience of like anyone remotely trans is like Austin Powers or something like that. And, where it's, the joke of just like,
Right.
oh, that's not a woman, that's a man. Like, that sort of like was my representation, which of course is not, I think
It's not ideal.
it's not the most holistic representation, suffice to say.
Yeah.
But I remember being picked up by one of my relatives, because mum and dad were away for some reason, and I was just in the back of their car, and there was like a Woman's Weekly magazine or something. I forget the specific brand, but, that type of magazine. And just being a kid, I didn't have a phone at the time. And so I'm like, well, read this, I guess. And yeah, there was just an article about a girl who had transitioned, and that was just the first time that I had ever seen sort of like in a non-jokey, in a very real, someone who was, closer to my age. I mean, she was at the time, older than me, but, still a younger girl who had transitioned. And I was like, oh, this is like a real thing that, like, and I read about just how, like, it changed her life and all the feelings that she had, and, enough of them resonated with me that I was like, okay, I'm gonna start thinking about some of this. And, then there were just, and like this was then years and years of me just mulling it over and considering things. And at the time, I was like, okay, like, what would transitioning to being, like a woman be like for me? And like, to a degree, there was, a lot of pressure of just like, oh God, like there's doing all of the, doing all of the procedures and hormones and stuff like that. Because certainly at the time, like, I thought that like those were like, you had to do all those things, right?
Yeah.
And because, like, I didn't have, a nuanced perspective. I didn't know anyone up, and like, it wasn't until the later years at school where there was actually someone who came out and was transitioning at school. But at that time, like, I was already sort of like, okay, I'm going through my own internal stuff. There was definitely the medical side of things was daunting. There was the sort of just knowledge of like, I know what, if I came out as gay or pan, which, no, my parents wouldn't have at the time, were like, oh, what even is that? But I mean, this was still at a time where, like, like, there were still people being like, look, you can be gay, but like, don't be bi, like, at least choose one of them.
Yeah, pick one or the other.
And so like, I already knew that would have been a difficult
Mm.
conversation. Gender, I'm like, I had only sort of just been, like, coming to terms with, like, this being a real thing. I know that this would be, like, a complete, slap, which, to be fair, I was pretty correct when I eventually did come clean. And so, yeah, I think it had a whole lot more expectation of, like, I got to do something about this. Whereas being, you know, or like all these other things, it's like I can kind of just exist and do what I want, and at some point there's like I'm going to move out and I can sort of do my own thing, and so if I go on dates with these particular people, like what's that really going to matter? I can sort of deal with that in my own time, and I don't know, gender just, it feels like I do feel like sort of my queerness outside of, like gender as part of my identity, but like the gender is just so much more like circulating of identity that it just felt so like, okay, yeah, something needs to be done. I can't just be like, okay, so I've said this and now everything just sort of, let's act as normal.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember that conversation
Oh,
with your parents when you first told them?
oh, well, I remember not having a conversation with my parents, but specifically only my mum. I
Right.
waited until, I waited until Dad was away from work. Yeah, and it wasn't because I want to make clear it's not because I like feared his
Yeah.
reaction, anything. I think it was mostly just I was definitely closer with Mum at the time, and also I didn't feel like I had the capacity to like, it's like, okay, I want to have a one-on-one conversation. I don't want it to feel like 2 against 1, irrespective of, who it was, and just Dad goes away to work, and so, it worked out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember telling her that like, hey, I want to talk to you. It's a big, big talk. And I remember she told me like afterwards that she did sort of like was anticipating a I'm gay conversation.
Okay.
Which I'm like, okay, so you were like 33% correct.
A little bit.
Just, like you got part of it. Yeah, she said, like it was, I mean, I remember her being shocked. Like I remember her being shocked. I don't remember much of a reaction at the time. Like the conversation itself, I think could have gone as, well, no, I certainly, like there was no support in it, but like it was not adversarial. There wasn't, she didn't react. So I think it was as neutral as you could possibly hope it to be in either direction, which is good, like certainly better than sort of an adverse reaction. But I will say that the complexity came later down the road.
Yeah. And like, what was it like for you to go into those conversations knowing that the likelihood of getting like positive support affirmation immediately, which is what we hope for everybody in those conversations, was probably not going to happen because
There
that
wasn't even a
is
hope.
terrifying.
It wasn't even a
Yeah.
hope for me. Like there was not an inkling of me that thought that I was going to get any modicum of support.
Yeah.
For me, it was genuinely just like, this is something that is like, I just need to get this out there. I just need to, like, things need to change, things need to happen, movement needs to be made, because at that point, like I was talking to, that psychologist because I tried to kill myself. Things were dire, and I recognized that, like, look, this is, do or die at this point. And so I need to have this conversation, and just be clear of like, look, I need things to change in some shape or form, because if they just keep going on this trajectory, then, well, I know where this road leads.
Yeah.
But there was not a part of me that like felt like things are going to go my way if I don't fight for them.
Yeah.
That there was, I didn't feel like I was going to get the help that I needed unless I, really, really advocated for myself. And credit where credit is due. I think there was a lot of things that my parents did that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. They did a lot of research and found specific people for me to talk to, which I think was already a lot for them. It's just, of course, it's so difficult, when you're going through crisis, and you see like you're getting help that you don't feel like is enough. It's hard to be grateful at the time for like them still doing something.
Yeah.
But like they certainly were. But that isn't to say that there weren't a lot of heated discussions and, straight up arguments and, fights that got fairly emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. What was that like in terms of like, it's such a vulnerable place for you to be in for yourself, but also in those conversations, sort of like watching your family, like mom, dad, sister, like deconstructing their own beliefs, their own fear-based ideology around a lot of this stuff. Like people can go and listen to your mum's episode to hear what that was like from her perspective. But what was it like for you?
Oh, it was frustrating. I mean, as I said, we already talked about how for me, it was a very quick, like, realization of, oh, these thoughts are not my own.
Yeah.
And so even, as a kid, which, I admit that, well, I say a kid, like, we were having all these conversations when I was, like 18, 19, which I guess, in a relative sense is still a kid. Immense frustration because it was just, for me, like, I felt, and, still feel that there are some things that, like, even if I didn't argue them as well as I might today, like, I'm saying all the right things. Why are you not just getting on board? Like, why is it so difficult for you to just realize that, like, why is it so difficult for you to just unlearn, an entire adulthood worth of conditioning?
Yeah. Yep.
And, like, I say that obviously in jest now, but like at the time, like I genuinely was like, why is this so hard for you? Like to me, you sound like an idiot.
Yep.
This is ridiculous. Why are you holding on to these things that don't make sense?
Yeah. Yep. And I think that that's like, from my perspective, I go like, that's the most like typical human response in that moment when you are at the most like vulnerable and sort of like going through your own unraveling and learning and coming into yourself. And like, there's so much change happening internally that of course you're kind of like, hurry the fuck up. Like basically, like, I think that that's, and like you said, now you can look back on that differently. But at the time, you actually don't have to because that's not your experience in the moment.
I remember, like, it just came back to mind, a particular tidbit that was shared by all three of my, family members at one point or another during, heated arguments where they eventually would just say, you just like arguing, which to me, like, frustrated me to no end because even like at that age, I recognize, I'm like, you've just hit me with like an unwinnable prompt because like if I continue to try and advocate for myself, I'm just continuing to argue, thus proving your point that I'm just in it because I like arguing. I either agree that yes, I do just like arguing, in which case again, like there's no sort of service being given to, the point that I actually want to try and get across, or I say, well, no, I don't just like arguing, which of course is argumentative. And so it was always a very difficult thing to navigate because like as much as I got frustrated, like I can understand that from their perspective. They didn't say that as a gotcha. Well, I think sometimes they did, but there's nuance in everything. But like there was a genuine belief of just like, no, I don't want to believe, like you are just trying to provoke is easier to reconcile than maybe you have a point.
Yeah. Yeah. What was like throughout all of this, like they're obviously like doing their own sort of unpacking and unlearning and all of that sort of thing. But at what point did you actually feel secure within your own gender throughout this process?
God. I mean, the real answer is like, I don't even know if I feel completely secure even today, but like not in I'm not sure, but just sort of the way that I feel, I know is so, like I get very existential thinking about identity and how much it's shaped
Yeah.
by like how much is internal, how much is external, how much of my dysphoria is, completely socially based. There are a lot of people that say it's innate and a lot of people that say that it's completely social, somewhere in the middle maybe is where the truth is. And yeah, and so because of like all of those things, I never know fully how secure it's like I don't know how to feel secure in something that is so, I think, still ever presently. I mean, we're having discussions about where people can go to the bathroom. Like it's
Yeah.
still ultimately not something that is like, okay, like we've got it settled and now it's all just everyone's own personal journey to figure out what their situation is. It's like, no, we're still in the middle of global confusion over who's right on this and who's, I mean, I wouldn't say confused, like I, very much believe a particular thing, but like, we haven't reached consensus is
No.
the point. And
Yeah.
so I guess for me personally, I find it hard to feel secure in my identity when I at the moment still feel like so much of my identity is externally, I won't say validated, but processed. And so what those things mean is, yeah, like like as I said, like I'm non-binary and sometimes, kind of err into gender fluidity, but if I'm in queer spaces, 90% of people clock me as an NB straight away. I just have that amorphous vibe. But outside of those environments, I'm getting he-himmed basically, without question. Maybe if I doll up, a bit and really zhuzh into things, it's like, okay, if I'm going to the club or something like that, I'll get she-heard on
Yeah.
occasion, but I really gotta push into that. But certainly ain't no one they-theming me from, just a default.
Yeah.
And so, which like I've come to terms with, I'm certainly not as, debilitatingly affected by it as I once was, but certainly in terms of just like the security aspect, yeah, it affects it.
Yeah, absolutely. What about in terms of like, as over the years, because I know it's been about 10 years since you had that initial conversation with mum.
Oh
Like,
God, yeah, it has.
yeah, I only know that because she told me. But like, what has it been like? Or what was it like when you felt like you had like the affirmation from your family around your gender? What was that like?
I can't, because it's been such a long, drawn out process. I can't think
Yeah.
of like a single moment where I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we've come from the right to the left on
Mm.
this issue here. I certainly would say that they have, but I
Yeah.
so I guess I'll just sort of, I can't think of like a singular experience of just like, oh my God, wow. But certainly
Yeah.
like today, I have such a better relationship with, both my parents and my sister. I, you know,
Mm.
know that, maybe she'll get an opportunity to do her own podcast episode, but like the arguments that
I'll
we
just have the
had,
whole Pesavento family.
yeah, arguments that we had, even like I did argue with her, but like even just the arguments I had with, mum and dad seriously, seriously affected her growing up and seriously affected
Yeah.
our relationship. And so, but yeah, like that, like that relationship has improved. Things have improved between, both mum and I and dad and I. I think mum and I are very, very similar in a lot of
Mm.
ways. I mean, I don't know how much you have caught on, but we both certainly, we love to talk. We're both very emotional people, and
Yeah.
which I think is a virtue in many instances. But
Mm.
I definitely believe that like every aspect about everyone, good and bad, is just like, two sides of the same coin. And so as
Mm.
empathetic as we both can be, my goodness, do we get very emotionally involved in
Mm.
conversations, which we very rarely back down, which can be much to the chagrin of those who have to witness those spats. But that's definitely improved, and I have been able to have much more open conversations with
Mm.
both, with all my family, close family, Um, and yeah, so like it is well and truly improved.
Yeah. What about extended family? What was it like navigating a like extended family and, telling other people in like just the wider network that you're a pastor's kid. So like people know you as a pastor's kid. And so what was that like?
Here's where we get, I think, a little spicy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that there's definitely a bit of complexity with some of my family who are still quite involved in church,
Yeah.
members more than others. And I think that especially has rung true with their politics, So a lot of my family, lovely and,
Mm.
tend to keep the peace, whereas others I would say are very, very firmly, I'd even go so far as to say far right leaning, which is difficult. And, I won't name names, but there are certainly some
Yeah.
members of my family that I just,
For the sake of my podcast, let's not name those names.
yeah, but like that's what makes it difficult is
Yeah.
that there's such a spectrum there. And yeah, so it's because like there are some members of my family who I know that like we disagree with some things, but it's sort of just like, okay, we're just not going to touch that subject at all.
Yeah.
For the most part, like that tends to be fine, like I'm now consistently called by, my current name, which is good. The
Progress.
misgendering is pretty consistent across the board, but like what can you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
And the um you know as I said, there are just some conversations that you stay clear of, but then there are other times where it just comes up and I can't help but would be like, okay, I'm just going to ignore it because, if it's I'm typically only sort of, in these gatherings as just like big family gatherings and don't really
Yeah.
have that much backup. So it's like, okay, let's just sort of survive this particular, outing until it's over. And then I'll be like, oh, wow, okay. Just a fresh reminder of what, particular
Yeah.
perspectives are held. And then, another day will come across and, some of them will be the most lovely people you've ever met. People
Yeah.
are nuanced and interesting and it's, a difficult thing to grapple.
I mean, that must feel like emotional whiplash, though. Like to sort of
God, yeah.
go between those things, like, and to put yourself in scenarios and gatherings where you know that, like, emotionally, this is not necessarily the safest place for you.
Yeah, I think there are some events in particular, again, I won't go into specifics, but
Yeah.
just particular interactions where I was like, oh, this actually feels particularly hostile towards me.
Yeah.
And that particular instance was difficult to deal with, especially because I was not in a very good headspace at the
Yeah.
time. And so that was particularly impactful. And I think the difficult thing for me has been that community is such a important thing to me. I mean, having been raised in church, it's like it's the thing. And now
Yeah.
since, having left church, it's like I've just been struggling for the remainder of my life to try and re-find that sort of intensity that I've never, even, in like nerd spaces, it's gotten close, but still not quite as just intertwined as, I mean, hell, like I grew up in, all like 90% of the people I know from school are people who I know from church, who are people I know from youth group. And it's all sort of just like my entire social life
Yeah.
is twisted around each other. It's like, how can you recreate that outside religion? You really can't. I've joked so many times about like, honestly, the thing I really need to do to get ahead in life is start a cult.
Yeah, no, we don't want to do that. But you're right. Like, it is like, it's one of the things that we hear the most in terms of like people coming out of high control spaces or coming out of faith spaces is that in church, you have ready made community, like inbuilt. You believe the same thing. Like, it doesn't really matter about anything else because that's what community is centered on in those spaces. And you're right, it's incredibly hard, if not almost impossible, to replicate that coming out of it. So yeah, it's It's incredibly tricky coming out of those spaces.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it's so difficult, because like family is, it's the community you're born with,
Yeah.
which makes it so difficult when because like there's such a desperate, it's like for me, there's such a desperate yearning to make family work, which is why,
Yeah.
like I tried because I know a lot of people who grow up, in religious families or even just, politically separate
Mm,
families, and they just realize like, okay, like I just am going to, like I'm going to go no contact, it's not worth the effort, I'm just going, like my parents disagree with me, and so I'm gonna do my own thing. And for me, I couldn't do that. Like I just didn't want to have to grapple with like a moving forward without this. But at the same time, like found family is such an important thing to me, and
yeah.
so it's this weird dichotomy between like recognizing like, family doesn't have to end in blood, but at the same time,
Mm,
really so desperately wanting to like, because I see like, some of my family and how close they are, like my extended family, and, just like I want that. I yearn
yeah.
for that. But there, are elements that I'm like, I just don't feel like, and I've had, intense conversations with, well, I wouldn't say intense, but I've had deeper conversations with, some select family members, which has, I think, reinforced to me, like, okay, we are fundamentally not operating on the same wavelength here. And, it's difficult to sort of, like, obviously, catching up for Christmas, it's lovely. And, that's,
Yeah.
for always good, but it's like, damn, it is difficult to sort of connect on a deeper level than sort of just meeting up, every so often on the holidays.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you like a threshold that you are never really going to ever surpass because of that, which makes it like it's really hard. I think only ever know that you are going to have sort of like surface level connection with people that you would love to have a deeper level of connection with. That's so hard. Yeah. In terms of like faith and spirituality, where does that all land with you today?
Oh, I was really hoping we were going to get to this question. Because I have gone through, much like everything else, a roller coaster of, I
Yeah.
obviously was deep in the Kool-Aid of Christianity, and then came out of that and had a very, very deep, sort of edgy atheist age,
Mm-hmm.
era. But I think I've experienced too much in my life that I can't fully explain, that I'm like, oh, there's got to be something going
Mm,
on. I don't know what. And I think the thing that I've always struggled with is, okay, I believe that there is something beyond this, but so what is the morality of that? Like, one of the reasons that I've struggled with, like, okay, is there, an uppercase G God,
mm,
um, who is all knowing and all good? And it's like, I really, like that, I really struggle with, because it's
yeah.
like there is a lot of things that aren't going too great, and, why are you, like the whole concept of miracles, it's like, okay, so he is intervening sometimes,
Yeah.
but not all the time. Like I had cancer. It's like, okay, so like, did my parents just pray hard enough? But then, little Susie in the clinic next door, like her parents, like, oh, sorry,
Yeah.
kid, your friends didn't pray hard enough, so better luck next time.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've really struggled with, which is why I think currently, I guess technically it would be like agnostic, but just like, I feel very confident that there is something more. Like I'm not like, oh, I don't know if there is something, or I don't know if there isn't. I'm like, no, I like ghosts and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, 100%. There are spirits going out there.
Yes.
That they be flicking my lights sometimes, and you know, playing with the electrical outlets. It's a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, but I mean, just to kind of like fully go back, I still have like a very vivid memory of just a dark hooded figure that would just stand at the edge of my hospital bed when I had cancer, which,
Oh,
yeah,
right. I mean, that sounds terrifying, to be fair.
yeah, not fun. I remember being
Oh,
quite, upset by it at the time, but, it
yeah.
makes for a fun ghost story.
Yeah, I imagine. Goodness.
But,
As a kid,
yeah,
terrifying.
but yeah, so like I definitely believe in something. I don't know necessarily what is going on, you know. I do have like an appreciation for like the Greek pantheon. And not to say that like I specifically, you know, believe in that, but just a sense of humanism in the way that they're portrayed of just like, yeah, look, Zeus is all powerful and stuff like that, but he's a bit of an asshole sometimes, honestly. Like, he gets up to mischief, you know? Half of the world's problems, you know, explained by Greek mythology is just Zeus getting up to, you know, chicanery. Like, that makes sense to
I
me.
wish I could ask more questions about that, but I don't know a single thing about Greek mythology, so I'm kind of tapping out of that part.
No, I wouldn't have. I don't have enough. I used to be a big Greek mythology nut, but I don't have quite the backing for it. Surface level stuff I still remember, but don't think we could have an entire conversation on it.
Yeah, no, fair. Okay, I mean, before I get to like what I usually end all of these episodes on, I feel like I can't not ask what it is like for you as like a gender diverse person in a world that is basically a bit of a shitstorm in terms of like trans and gender diverse rights.
Yeah, it is definitely something to, you know, it's interesting to navigate. It's one of those things where you know, fortunately for the most part can still, like, I can stealth as mask, you know, so I can cis pass when I really need to, you know, so there is that benefit. Don't, you know, like, that's not the best thing to.
I mean, the fact that you have to is like infuriating. Yeah.
It's a dichotomy, you know, like on one hand, I'm like, I'm glad that I can, you know, hide this part of my identity, but it's, you know, it's like, oh, I'm so glad, like masking as an example. Like I have gotten really good at masking when I need to. It's exhausting, but I'm really, really good at it. So on one hand, I'm like, I'm so glad that I can navigate social, you know, situations really effectively, but God, does it drain me.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you take a little bit to get a little bit sometimes. And, you know, like fortunately we don't have nearly as a divisive situation as, you know, other parts of the world at the moment, though we are getting a bit of a trickle down effect, it seems. And you know, every so often I read like, oh, okay, well, I thought we were better than that, but guess not. And so I think my sort of situation is just like, as is every other thing, of just taking it day by day and be like, okay, like, let's just take one more step to try and get to where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I like to finish all of these episodes with some encouragement for people.
Oh,
And
lovely.
I have started just like tailoring my question a little bit. And so I would love to know what you would say to someone who is who might even be another pastor's kid, who might just be in a stock standard Christian family, who is wrestling with their queerness or their gender and is like fucking terrified of that conversation. What would you say to them?
Oh, now, see, this is where my autism is definitely coming out, because I'm like, oh, there's like, well, you know, but like in this context, I'd say this, and in this context, I'd say this, but I'd say first and foremost to be hopeful.
Yeah.
You know, to know that things can get better. You know, maybe talking to your parents will be the thing that, you know, maybe all it is going to require is a conversation. Maybe it will require 50 conversations and, you know, that'll suck a bit more, but, you know, you can get there. Or maybe they're not going to move, but there are other people out there who can help you, who can support you, who can love you. And, you know, there are so many different ways that things can go and so many different circumstances people find themselves in. And it's hard to predict all of those things. And you're really figuring out how much you have control over the circumstances that, you know, you're faced with, but they can get better. I know, like, it's the thing that if someone told me this as a kid, you know, it's like, oh God, you know, I would have hated hearing this, but like, it is about persistence, you know, you really gotta be like, you know, it's gonna work out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's why I love having these conversations, because whilst, yes, if we heard what you just said in isolation, they might just like, throw it in the bin, so to speak. But
Yeah.
in conjunction with, hearing your whole story and, a bunch of other people's stories, and like we start to build a picture of like there is possibility here, and, possibility is something so many people in those situations just need to have, irrespective of what that possibility is, but just something that there is even is so powerful. Yeah. I am so grateful for you joining me. This has been a really beautiful conversation.
I'm so
So
glad that
thank you.
I got to do it. Thank you for the
Yes.
opportunity.
It is always really beautiful when I get to like, I've done that with like couples as well in terms of like both sides. But I love the parent-child dynamic, and it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. So thank you.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Surface. If this episode resonated, challenged you, or named something you've struggled to put words to, I'm really glad you found your way here. You'll find ways to connect, learn more, and explore further in the show notes. As always, you are good, you have always been good, and your story matters always.